The spear punched through flesh and buckskin with a sickening wet thud, stealing Kael's breath in a ragged, burning gasp. Agony, white-hot and immediate, exploded in his side. He felt the rough-hewn shaft vibrate with the force of the impact, felt his own blood, shockingly warm, begin to spill. The parched earth rushed up to meet him as his knees buckled, the weight of the world crashing down. Through a haze of pain, he heard a woman's scream tear through the air. Sarah. Her cry was a blade twisting in his already wounded spirit. Behind her, shielded by his collapsing body, their infant son Daniel let out a terrified wail. Arrows, like broken quills, littered the ground around them, grim decorations from the furious, desperate battle he had just waged. His fingers, slick and trembling, tightened instinctively around the worn handle of his tomahawk. He fought the encroaching darkness. He had to. For them. How had it come to this? How had a love so pure ignited such a devastating firestorm? For Kael, a warrior of the Willow Creek people, it began, as many fateful journeys do, with a path he was never meant to tread. Kael moved through the dense forest with the silence of a hunting cat, his senses alive to the snap of every twig, the rustle of every leaf. He was a man tuned to the whispers of the wild, his eyes, the color of dark river stones, missing nothing. This keenness, honed since boyhood, served him well as a provider for his tribe. But today, it served a different purpose. It guided him along a hidden game trail, one he kept deliberately obscured, leading him away from the familiar lands of the Willow Creek and towards the burgeoning, often wary settlement of Stone Creek Crossing. His destination was a small, isolated cabin, nestled deep within a sun-dappled hollow, its chimney breathing a faint plume of smoke that only a trained eye like Kael's could discern from a distance. There lived Sarah. She had arrived in Stone Creek Crossing a season past, a woman alone but for the quiet strength in her cornflower blue eyes and a resilience that seemed to defy the harshness of the frontier. She spoke little of her past, her history, a carefully guarded territory. Kael had first seen her at the settlement's trading post, her gaze meeting his with an unexpected directness, a flicker of recognition passing between two solitary souls in a crowded, often indifferent world. Their encounters, at first accidental, soon became deliberate, clandestine meetings under the vast, star-dusted sky, far from the prying eyes of her people and his. Respect blossomed into a tender, fierce love, a dangerous sanctuary in a land that rarely tolerated such unions. And then there was Daniel, their son, a tiny, perfect miracle, his innocent gurgles and soft breaths a testament to their forbidden bond, a secret joy that also amplified their peril 100-fold. Each smile from the boy, each touch of his small hand, was a precious gift Kael stored in his heart, a warmth against the encroaching chill of disapproval he increasingly felt from his own people. The winds of discontent were beginning to stir within the Willow Creek tribe. At their center was Borin, a formidable warrior whose heart seemed to have hardened alongside the calluses on his hands. Borin was a man shackled to the past, viewing the influx of settlers and their strange ways not as an inevitable tide of change, but as a poisonous blight upon the tribe's sacred traditions and ancestral lands. His voice, resonant and commanding, often filled the council lodge with fiery rhetoric, speaking of spiritual purity, of the necessity of separation, of excising any perceived weakness or contamination before it could fester and spread. He never spoke Kael's name directly in these early days, not in connection with any specific transgression. Yet Kael felt Borin's gaze follow him, cold and calculating, like the predatory stillness of a wolf before the strike. Every journey Kael undertook toward Sarah's cabin, every shared moment of fragile peace with her and Daniel, became heavier, shadowed by the looming threat Borin represented. Sarah, too, bore the burden of their secret world. In Stone Creek Crossing, she navigated a path of careful civility. Most settlers were occupied with their own struggles, their own dreams of taming the wild land. But a woman living alone, with an infant son, and no apparent husband or steady male protector, inevitably drew whispers. Mrs. Albright, the stern-faced wife of the general store owner, would purse her lips with disapproval whenever Sarah came to trade her carefully tended garden vegetables for flour or salt. Her questions were always a little too pointed, her gaze lingering a moment too long on Daniel's dark hair and eyes, so like his father's. Sarah would meet these subtle inquisitions with a quiet dignity, her chin held high, but inside, a knot of anxiety would tighten. Her small cabin, their haven of love, felt increasingly like a vulnerable island in a turbulent sea, beautiful but terribly exposed. She'd taken to barring the door more firmly at night, starting at the howl of a distant coyote or the creak of a floorboard, imagining eyes watching from the tree line. The uneasy balance of their hidden life began to fracture. Borin's pronouncements in the tribal council grew more direct, his accusations sharper. He spoke now of warriors whose loyalties were divided, whose spirits were being weakened by an unnatural fascination with the settler world. He painted vivid pictures of ancestral wrath, of hunts that would fail and sicknesses that would spread if the tribe did not reaffirm its commitment to the old ways, untainted and pure. Kael listened, his expression impassive, but his gut churned with a cold dread. He knew Borin was methodically laying a snare, not just for him, but for any who dared to bridge the gap between their two hostile worlds. One late afternoon, as Kael was carefully erasing his tracks after leaving Sarah's cabin, he sensed he was not alone. He didn't break stride, didn't betray his awareness, but his hand drifted casually closer to the knife sheathed at his hip. As he rounded a copse of ancient gnarled oaks, he found Borin and two of his most ardent followers blocking the narrow path. They hadn't been hunting. Their stance was too deliberate, too confrontational. Borin's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. "You wander far from the village fires, Kael. Your feet seem to prefer these paths, the ones that lead away from your people." Kael met his stare, his own eyes like chips of obsidian. "A man walks where he must, Borin. My loyalty to the Willow Creek people is etched in my heart, proven in battle." "Loyalty?" Borin scoffed, taking a menacing step closer. One of his companions mirrored the movement, his hand resting on the handle of his war club. "Loyalty is a straight arrow, Kael, not a winding serpent's trail that leads into the enemy's camp. There are whispers, whispers of a divided heart. Such a heart cannot be trusted when the drums of conflict sound." The air crackled with unspoken violence. Kael could smell the aggression coming off them, the scent of stale sweat and old hatreds. He remained still, a coiled spring of readiness beneath a veneer of calm. "The only serpent here, Borin, is the one that poisons good men's minds with suspicion and fear." For a long moment, they stood locked in a silent battle of wills. Then, with a dismissive grunt, Borin gestured for his companions to step aside. "Be wary, Kael. A path walked in shadows often leads to a sudden, dark drop." Kael inclined his head, a gesture so slight it could have been mistaken for a breeze rustling his hair, then continued on his way. But the encounter left a bitter taste in his mouth. Borin was no longer content with veiled warnings. He was actively seeking confrontation. The time for caution was rapidly running out. That night, under the cold indifference of the moon, Kael made a decision. He could not run, could not hide Sarah and Daniel forever. If Borin sought a confrontation, then a confrontation he would have. But it would be on Kael's terms, to protect what he loved, not to satisfy Borin's thirst for power. Kael intensified his vigilance. He began to fortify Sarah's cabin in subtle ways, strengthening the door, clearing brush that might offer cover to an attacker. He taught Sarah how to use the old rifle she kept above the hearth, its mechanism stiff from disuse, guiding her hands until her aim became steady, her fear giving way to a grim determination. He spent hours with Daniel, memorizing the curve of his cheek, the sound of his laughter, etching these precious moments into his soul, as if they might be his last. His internal conflict was a constant torment. His warrior instincts urged him to strike at Borin first, to eliminate the threat. But his love for Sarah, his desire to build a life, not to perpetuate cycles of violence, held him back. He sought out some of the more moderate elders, men like Hawkwinter, who had known him since he was a boy, hoping to appeal to their sense of justice. to counter Borin's poison. But Borin's influence, fueled by genuine fear of the settlers and a potent charisma, was strong. Hawkwinter listened patiently, his gaze troubled, but offered no easy solutions. "The old ways are deep roots, Kael," he'd said, his voice heavy, "and some roots grow gnarled with age and fear." Sarah, too, sensed the shift. The air around their small haven grew charged, pregnant with an unspoken dread. One morning, she found a crude symbol, a broken arrow, Borin's favored mark of warning, scratched into the earth just beyond her woodpile. Her blood ran cold. She didn't tell Kael immediately, not wanting to add to his burdens. But that night, she clung to him fiercely, her tears silent but scalding against his skin. He held her close, whispering assurances he wasn't sure he could keep, the scent of pine and wood smoke from her hair a fragile comfort against the rising tide of his own fear. His quietness, his controlled exterior, was a dam holding back a torrent of emotions: love, rage, and a profound sorrow for the impossible choices laid before him. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that Borin was orchestrating a final, brutal resolution. He could feel the noose tightening. The storm broke on a cold gray morning, the sky the color of tarnished silver. Mato, a young, brave, scarcely old enough to wear warrior's paint, one who had always admired Kael's skill and fairness, sought him out at the edge of the village. Mato's face was ashen, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a desperate loyalty that had overcome that fear. "Kael, you must listen," Mato panted, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "Borin, he spoke at the fire last night. He named you. He named the settler woman and the child." The boy choked on the words. "He said you are a blight, an infection that must be burned out before it consumes us all. He has gathered warriors. They ride at dawn to her cabin. He means to cleanse the stain," he said. "He means to kill them, Kael, and drag you back in shame." Kael's heart turned to ice, then to fire. He gripped Mato's shoulder, his fingers biting into the young brave's flesh, not in anger, but with an intensity that conveyed the terrible urgency of the moment. "You did a brave thing, Mato, a true warrior's act. Go now. Do not speak of this to anyone. Be safe." As Mato disappeared into the shadows, Kael was already moving. There was no more strategy, no more weighing of options. There was only Sarah. There was only Daniel. He was a blur of motion, his long strides eating up the distance, his breath rasping in his chest, each beat of his heart a war drum counting down the few precious moments he had left. He prayed to the spirits of his ancestors, not for his own life, but for the speed and strength to stand between his beloveds and the hatred that was even now descending upon them. The first faint streaks of dawn were painting the eastern horizon with brutal strokes of orange and crimson as he finally crested the ridge overlooking Sarah's secluded hollow. And there, moving like dark specters through the mist-laden grass below, was Borin's war party. A dozen of them, perhaps more, their forms grim and purposeful, weapons glinting ominously in the nascent light. Kael's breath caught in his throat. He was one. They were many. But numbers meant nothing now. All that mattered was reaching the cabin before they did. He plunged down the wooded slope, heedless of the branches that tore at his buckskins, the stones that threatened to twist his ankles. He reached the rear of the small cabin, his chest heaving, just as Sarah, her face pale and drawn, was peering through a small gap in the shutters. Her eyes, wide with dawning terror as she spotted the approaching warriors, found his, and a flicker of desperate hope ignited within their depths. He slipped through the back door, bolting it behind him. "They're here," she breathed, her voice trembling as she clutched Daniel, who, sensing his mother's acute distress, began to whimper. "I know, my love. I know." Kael's voice was low, preternaturally calm, a rock in the surging tide of her fear. He gently took Daniel from her, pressing a swift, fierce kiss to the baby's brow, then handed him back. "Stay low, away from the door and windows. Keep him as quiet as you can." A harsh, commanding voice sliced through the morning air. "Kael, we know you are in there. Your treachery has been uncovered. You have defiled the honor of the Willow Creek people. Come out. Deliver the white woman and her half-blood spawn to us, and perhaps For the sake of your past deeds, the elders might yet show you a sliver of mercy." It was Borin, his voice dripping with venom and self-righteous fury. Kael exchanged a long, profound look with Sarah. In her eyes, he saw not just fear, but an echo of his own unwavering resolve. He touched her cheek, a fleeting caress that spoke volumes of love, of regret, of a promise he intended to keep, no matter the cost. "They will not touch you," he vowed, his voice a raw whisper. "Nor our son. I swear it." He grabbed his bow, his movement swift and sure, knocking an arrow as he moved towards a narrow firing slit he had prepared. He was a hunter, a warrior. But today, he was something more. He was a shield. "Borin!" Kael's voice rang out, sharp and defiant, carrying clearly to the warriors outside. "This woman and this child are innocent. They have wronged no one. Your quarrel is with me, and me alone. Face me if you dare." A chorus of jeering laughter was his only answer. "You, Kael? You are but one flea, easily crushed. The child is a curse upon our tribe. The woman, a white man's whore who has ensnared you. Stand aside, or your blood will water this tainted ground alongside theirs." Then the arrows began to fly. They thudded into the sturdy log walls, splintered the wooden shutters, each impact a jarring reminder of the fury outside. Kael returned fire, his shots measured and precise, each arrow loosed with a prayer and a grim purpose. A yelp of pain from beyond the cabin walls told him at least one of his shafts had found its mark. The siege had begun. The small cabin became the epicenter of a desperate, uneven battle. Kael moved like a cornered wolf, fierce and cunning, using every piece of cover, every shadow, his arrows finding gaps in the attacker's offense. But he knew it was a battle of attrition he could not win. They were too many. Their hatred was too relentless. Suddenly, amidst a brief lull in the assault, a different voice emerged from the attacking party, deeper, older, carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Borin, hold your arrows. There has been enough. This path you tread leads only to dishonor, not to justice." Kael risked a glance through a tiny crack. His heart leaped. It was Chief Hawkwinter. The elder had ridden with Borin's party, a fact that had dismayed Kael. But now, Hawkwinter stood apart from the others, his weathered face a mask of profound conflict and dawning disapproval. Several of Borin's warriors visibly hesitated, their bows lowering slightly as they looked from their furious leader to the respected elder. Borin, incensed, whirled on Hawkwinter. "Dishonor?" Borin snarled, his face contorted in a mask of rage. "He shelters the source of our tribe's shame. He fathers an abomination. This is not honor, old man. It is a cancer that must be cut out. The spirits themselves cry out for this cleansing." Hawkwinter did not flinch. His gaze, steady and sorrowful, met Borin's fiery glare. "I have known Kael since he was but a boy who chased butterflies with a toy bow. I have seen him bleed for our people on the field of battle. I see a warrior, Borin, protecting his own blood, however you may judge it. Perhaps your spirits are deafened by your own war cries. True courage does not lie in crushing the vulnerable." Hawkwinter's eyes then found Kael's briefly through the slit. He had seen Kael's skill, his bravery in this impossible defense. He remembered other times Kael had chosen the harder right over the easier wrong. This was the pivot. The palpable hesitation amongst Borin's followers, Hawkwinter's courageous, unexpected defiance, it was a sliver of a chance, a fragile branch extended over a raging torrent. But Borin was a man consumed. He saw not just a transgressor in Kael, but a challenge to his authority, his worldview. And now, that challenge was being amplified by an elder he had hoped to control. His pride, a monstrous, untamed beast, reared its ugly head. Sarah, desperate for any sign of reprieve, had crept closer to the door, trying to see, to understand the shift in the confrontation. Her movement, slight as it was, caught Borin's eye. "The seed of corruption remains," Borin bellowed, his maddened gaze locking onto Sarah. He hefted his long-bladed spear, its sharpened point gleaming with malevolent promise. With a savage roar that was more animal than human, he lunged, aiming for Sarah's exposed heart. Time fractured into a million razor-sharp shards. Sarah screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, instinctively twisting to shield Daniel with her own body. Kael saw it all in that horrifying, elongated moment. Borin's brutal charge, the deadly arc of the spear, Sarah's horrified face. There was no thought, no calculation, only a primal, overwhelming imperative: love, sacrifice. With a guttural cry torn from the very depths of his soul, Kael launched himself across the confined space of the cabin. He slammed into Sarah, his momentum carrying her and the squirming, wailing Daniel towards the relative safety of the floor, away from the direct trajectory of Borin's murderous thrust. And then, the spear found its mark. Not in Sarah, but in him. The impact was a sledgehammer blow, driving the air from his lungs in a choked gasp. A blinding, searing agony ripped through his side, radiating outwards in sickening waves. He looked down, his vision blurring. The dark, fire-hardened shaft of Borin's spear jutted obscenely from his ribs, the polished stone tip buried deep within him. A sudden, terrifying weakness flooded his limbs. The world began to spin, to tilt, the sounds of the cabin, Sarah's frantic, sobbing cries, Daniel's terrified screams, the distant, shocked shouts of Borin's warriors fading in and out, as if carried on a swirling wind. He crumpled to his knees, his lifeblood already staining the rough-hewn floorboards a horrifying crimson. Yet even as consciousness threatened to abandon him, his warrior spirit fought on. His body, by sheer instinct, remained a shield in front of Sarah and their son. His hand, trembling violently, still clung to the handle of his tomahawk, its weight, a familiar, if fading, anchor. Borin stood panting over him, the butt of the spear still clutched in his fist, his chest heaving. A grotesque smile of savage triumph twisted his lips. So falls the great Kael, a traitor's death, for a white-skinned whore and her half-blood whelp. He wrenched the spear free with a grunt, preparing to deliver a final, killing blow, or perhaps to turn his insatiable rage back towards Sarah and the now unprotected child. "Hold!" Chief Hawkwinter's voice was a thunderclap that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. He strode forward, his face a storm of righteous fury and profound sorrow. He planted himself firmly between Borin's bloodlust and Kael's broken form. Several other warriors, their faces now etched with revulsion at Borin's brutality and moved by Kael's ultimate sacrifice, stepped forward to flank Hawkwinter, their weapons no longer aimed at the cabin, but implicitly at Borin himself. This is not the way of the Willow Creek people, Borin." Hawkwinter's voice shook, not with fear, but with a terrible, potent anger. He gestured towards Kael, who lay gasping in a spreading pool of his own blood, Sarah desperately trying to staunch the horrific wound with shaking hands. "This man, this Kael, has shown a courage, a love so profound that your hate-filled heart cannot even begin to comprehend it. He has spilled his precious blood, not in defiance of our sacred traditions, but in glorious defense of innocence. There will be no more killing here today. This desecration ends now." Borin stared, his eyes wide and wild, from Hawkwinter to the warriors, who now stood resolutely with the elder. He saw the condemnation in their eyes, the shame reflecting his own actions. His moment of triumph had shattered, replaced by the bitter ashes of disgrace. He was alone, his authority irrevocably broken by Kael's selfless act and Hawkwinter's moral courage. With a strangled cry of incoherent rage, Borin threw down his bloodied spear and stumbled away, disappearing into the forest like a wounded, discredited animal. Hawkwinter knelt beside the gravely wounded Kael, his weathered face etched with pain and a deep, newfound respect. "He lives," the elder murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "but the spirits hold him by a slender thread." He looked at Sarah, her face streaked with tears and Kael's blood, her eyes pleading. "Your man, woman. He is a warrior of true heart. His spirit is stronger than the mountain stone. He has bought your lives with a price few would be willing to pay." The days that followed were a desperate, whispered battle against the encroaching shadows of death. Sarah, under the protective watch of Hawkwinter and two of his most trusted warriors, tended Kael night and day in their small, blood-stained cabin. The spear had pierced deep, narrowly missing his heart but tearing through muscle and lung. Fever became his constant companion, his strong body racked with delirium and pain. But Sarah's love was a potent medicine. Her knowledge of healing herbs, learned from a grandmother wise in the old ways of her own distant people, combined with Kael's own indomitable will to live for her and Daniel, began, slowly, miraculously, to tip the scales. Borin was never seen again in the lands of the Willow Creek. His name became a whispered shame, a cautionary tale of how ambition and hatred could twist even a strong warrior into a monster. Chief Hawkwinter, his own spirit reawakened by Kael's sacrifice, began to speak with a new wisdom in the tribal councils. He did not preach an easy acceptance of the settlers, for the grievances were many and deep. But he spoke of understanding, of recognizing courage and honor wherever it was found, even across the painful divides of culture and blood. He spoke of Kael. Kael's recovery was arduous, leaving him with a fearsome scar that would forever serve as a testament to his ordeal and his love. The path ahead for him, Sarah, and young Daniel remained fraught with uncertainty. The chasm between their two peoples was wide and deep, not easily bridged by a single act of bravery, however profound. Yet, something had shifted. Kael's sacrifice had planted a seed, a fragile bloom of hope in the harsh, unforgiving soil of the frontier. The tale of the Willow Creek warrior, who took a spear to save the settler woman and their child, rippled outwards, carried on the wind like campfire smoke. In Stone Creek Crossing, it was met with a mixture of disbelief, condemnation, and grudging admiration. Some saw only transgression, but others, those whose hearts had not been entirely hardened by the brutal realities of frontier life, saw something more, a love that defied all boundaries, a courage that stared death in the face, a sacrifice that whispered of a shared humanity often forgotten in the struggle for survival. Kael and Sarah would continue to walk their difficult path, their hands clasped tightly, their son a living symbol of their improbable union. The frontier remained a wild, untamed place, its beauty matched only by its capacity for cruelty. But under the vast, watchful sky, in a small cabin nestled in a secluded hollow, a fragile peace had been bought with blood and courage. And Kael, the quiet warrior, knew in his scarred heart that his stand, his act of forbidden frontier love, had not been in vain. It was a testament, etched into the very soul of the land, that sometimes the fiercest battles are fought not for territory or honor as the world defines it, but for the simple, sacred right to love. And in that lay a triumph that would echo through the canyons long after their bones had turned to dust.